Great. So, hey everyone, thank you so much for logging in today. We're really excited to be here to talk to you about careers in pharmacy with the NHS. We have 45 minutes today and a ton of great information to get through. So, just in the meantime, I see that most of you have filled out the poll. Um, if any of you haven't yet, please go ahead and do so. I see that we have mostly students on today. So, great job taking initiative, coming to learn more about careers in pharmacy. Most of you know either nothing or only a little bit about a career in pharmacy. So you're in the right place. You're going to hear tons more information today. And most of you have not attended a Pathway CTM event before. Thanks so much for showing up today. If you want to go ahead and sign up for the program, you can scan this QR code on the screen and sign up after the event. It will take you about 3 minutes. And before moving on to the next slide, if you are a teacher streaming to students today, please go ahead and put how many students you're streaming to in the chat box. So before jumping into it, how can you communicate today? So we have the chat box and the Q&A box are going to be your main forms of communication. So chat box, if you want to participate in the conversation at all, share any personal stories or experiences that relate to what they're saying, feel free to put those in the chat box. We love to interact with you, and this is a great opportunity to network with people who are working in pharmacy. And then we also have the Q&A box. So at any point during the event, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can during the Q&A section at the end. So throughout the entire event, feel free to put it in any time. And then finally, during the Q&A section at the end, if you feel inclined to, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask a question. So my name is Rosie. I'm the events manager at Pathway CTM, and I'm really, really excited to be here with you today with these great staff that work in pharmacy to give you all of the information that you need. So just before jumping into them, I see that most people have filled out the poll, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Mostly students on today, so feel free to put your questions in the chat, but if you're a teacher streaming to students as well, feel free to put those in, have them raise their hands. Anything that they might want to know, put it in the Q&A box as well. So we are going to go ahead and introduce Nick now.
Thank you, Rosie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Haddington. I am the Pharmacy Dean for Health Education England South. Health Education England is what's known as an arm's length body. So we are an organisation that's responsible for education, training and workforce within the NHS. And my role is specifically around the pharmacy professions. So I'm delighted to come speak to you today about the pharmacy careers that are available to you. Next slide, please, Rosie. I am going to very briefly give you an overview of the pharmacy professions, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Matthew at the University of Bath, who's going to tell you a bit more about the science into practice. What am I going to cover? So this is what I'm talking about. What jobs are there in pharmacy? Where are these jobs in terms of what kind of employment setting, not the geography in terms of around the country, but what's the employment setting for the jobs? What training do you need? A little bit briefly about entry requirements and how much you might get paid, but not too much detail on those bits. Next slide, please, Rosie. The first bit I want to cover is where do pharmacy teams work and who is in the team. There's lots of pictures here of different pharmacists in different scenarios. Many of you will be familiar with the picture on the left, perhaps, which is pharmacists and pharmacy technicians in community pharmacy, but there are lots of different settings for the pharmacy workforce. Next slide, please. Let's look at the work settings. So to begin with, we've got the community pharmacy, which is the high street pharmacy that many people are familiar with. If you just want to advance to the animation, Rosie, that'd be great. So we've got in the middle this picture of the pharmacy. We've got an examination room and the interaction of the pharmacist over the counter with people who are coming to get advice on medicines, advice on medical conditions, and also get medicines supplied to them. And this is the main sector of pharmacy. Probably about 60% of the workforce works within the community pharmacy sector, and it's the most visible. As well as supplying medicines, pharmacists are involved in administering medicines in some cases too. So, for example, running clinics, administering vaccinations, You may well have heard about pharmacists administering flu vaccines and COVID vaccines recently. The next sector is hospital pharmacy. So if you want to advance again, hospital pharmacy probably makes up somewhere between 25 and 30% of the workforce. And these departments of people support the effective use of medicines within the hospital. This is a very patient-facing role as well. So pharmacists will typically be based in a pharmacy department, but they'll be going out every day onto the wards seeing patients. In the middle picture there, you can just see these little kind of swirly helter-skelter things coming down. A pharmacy in hospitals is quite interesting because there's quite a lot of automation and robotics used in the supply of medicines. And at the bottom, you can see what's known as an aseptics production unit. In the hospital pharmacy, there's very often a unit which manufactures drugs, and Matthew will show us a little bit more about the manipulation of drugs in a little bit. And then the other sectors to mention are general practice and industry research and teaching. Pharmacists working in general practice is an emerging sector. We have an increasing number of pharmacy professionals who work within GP surgeries, seeing patients directly and helping them with complex medicines issues. Next slide, please, Rosie.
Yeah, thanks. Just before we move on to the next slide, you guys, so you see here that there are not, working in the community isn't the only option in pharmacy. You also have the hospitals and general practice, which you may not have known before. And it's great because today we actually have Amy on, who is going into hopefully what she wants to go into, a hospital setting. So you'll hear from her just a little bit later.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Rosie. There are lots of opportunities. My background is originally in hospital pharmacy as well, but I've also worked within universities, and Matthew works within a university and has a hospital pharmacy background too. So there are lots of different areas to work within.
Absolutely.
So there are three main roles within pharmacy: pharmacist, pharmacy technician, and pharmacy assistants. Pharmacists we'll talk about first. So if you want to advance the slide, Rosie, thank you. So pharmacists are healthcare professionals who are registered with the General Pharmaceutical Council. You need to do a degree, which is the MPharm degree. That's what Amy's doing at the moment. And then you have to do a year in training after that as a foundation pharmacist before you sit your professional exams and register with the General Pharmaceutical Council. Pharmacists are clinicians. They are clinical medicines experts who are embedded within the healthcare team. They directly input into patient care. They typically lead the pharmacy team and have the higher level of pay of the pharmacy professionals. One of the really important things that's happening at the moment is that pharmacists are able to prescribe, so they're able to write prescriptions in their own right, not just supply medicines, and that's now being incorporated into the pharmacy degree. So everyone who registers as a pharmacist in the future will be able to independently prescribe medicines. The next staff group are pharmacy technicians. Pharmacy technicians are also registered professionals with the General Pharmaceutical Council, which is the pharmacy regulator. They're technical experts. They have a kind of a mid-level of seniority and pay in the team. And the route to become a pharmacy technician is that after A-levels, you typically do a level 3 qualification, which is an apprenticeship. It's a 2-year training course, which is training on the job while you get paid a salary. The final layer of really important staff members within the pharmacy team are pharmacy assistants. They're not registered with a GPHC, so they're an unregistered section of the workforce. They help with the supply function of medicines and support pharmacy technicians and pharmacists as part of the overall pharmacy team. It's probably the lower level of pay in the pharmacy team and involves a level 2 vocational qualification. Okay, next slide, please, Rosie. I'm going to hand over to Matthew next, but at the end of the presentation, there are some links to some different careers information. But if you just want to look at one of them, I would look at this website. This is a new resource which has been developed, which is Careers in Pharmacy. It's an interactive map. It shows you the main different sectors of pharmacy that we've talked about: community pharmacy, general practice, hospital, and shows you the different roles which are available in those settings. It also tells you about how to train to be in the pharmacy workforce and all the other information you'd need. So I'm going to stop there and hand over.
Thanks, Nick. So you guys, a really cool thing that we're doing today, we're going to hand over to Matthew now to show you guys a live experiment. So Matthew, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Rosie, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be talking to you all. So yeah, I'm Matthew Jones. I'm a pharmacy lecturer here at the University of Bath. And you might see just in the background, you can see his arm. There's my colleague, Lorenzo. So Lorenzo was going to be helping do this session with me, and then he got COVID, and it's his first day back. So we haven't been able to work on it together, so it's just me, but Lorenzo's here in case there's any questions that come up later. And Lorenzo's background is he works in the pharmacy department with me, but his particular speciality is in chemistry. My background, I am a pharmacist. I've worked, as Nick said, in hospital pharmacy and community pharmacy, but I've also worked here in the university. And in the university, I do lots of things, but some of that is around the practice of pharmacy, but also some of it is around making our medicines better and working in the labs and doing science. So I work with inhalers and injections to look at how we can make them better for patients. So can we have the next slide, please? So what I'm going to be doing is talking to you about how pharmacists and other pharmacy professionals use science to make or to use science to get better benefits for patients from medicines. We use lots of different types of science, particularly chemistry and biology. And I'm going to be talking you through a little case study to illustrate some of those types of science that we use to help patients get the best from their medicines. So next slide, thank you. Now, obviously, when we're caring for patients, what we want to do is to cure them. But sadly, we can't always manage that. And sometimes the time comes when we can't heal someone, we can't extend their life, but we can still care for them and we can still relieve their symptoms and help them live their life as best they can. And that's what we call palliative care. And that's provided by a whole team of different health professionals, but pharmacists are involved there. And our job in that situation is to help those patients get the best from their medicines to relieve their symptoms as well as possible. Can I have the next slide? So these patients might have several different symptoms at once. They might have some pain, maybe they feel sick, they might be very anxious, they might have lots of different symptoms. And so we need to control all of those. And so we might need to use several different medicines in these people. And once you've decided which medicines you want to use, you have to find a way to get that medicine into the patient. Can I have the next slide, please? And the most common way to do this is with what we would call an oral medicine, a tablet or a capsule. And these are really easy and convenient to use. There's a good chance you've used them yourselves at some point. And so if we can, we would use oral medicines. But very often with palliative care patients, they can't take oral medicines for different reasons. Perhaps their gut is blocked up with something and so it's not working. Or maybe they feel very sick and they just don't want to swallow something. So we need to find other options for these people. Can I have the next slide, please? So another alternative would be to use injections. And these are quite a good option in this situation because with an injection, the drug gets into your blood really quickly. And so it begins to work really quickly and we can relieve their symptoms as soon as we can. And so here's my first example of how pharmacists use science to improve the care of patients, because by understanding all the different ways you can get drugs into people, and there's probably 20 or more different ways that you can do that. If we understand that and how they work, we can pick the best option in each case to help each patient as best as possible. But you'll be very aware that injections they're not perfect, are they? And the big problem is that you have to stick a needle into someone. No one enjoys having needles stuck into them. And if these patients need to have several different medicines, then that's several injections, and that's not very nice. And actually, the problem is worse than that, because if I can have the next slide, your body looks at medicines as if they were poisons, and it tries to get rid of them. And so what this graph here shows is how much medicine you have in your blood at different times after having a dose of it. So you can see this patient's had an injection at 0 hours. And because injections get into your blood quickly, next slide, please. The amount of drug rather, in your blood goes up very quickly. But then, next slide, once it's all got into your blood, your liver and your kidneys start trying to get rid of it because your body thinks it's a poison. And you can see the amount of drug is coming down very slowly over about 24 hours. Next slide, please. So if we said this drug was a pain-killing drug, and we said that that purple box that's just appeared, that's the right amount of drug to have in your blood. It's enough to control your pain, but not so much that you're going to have side effects. So if that was the case, for this drug, it's working quite well. Actually, this patient has the right amount of drug in their blood for a 24-hour period. So we could probably give them 1 dose every day. That's just 1 injection a day, and their symptoms are going to be controlled. That's good. But it's not always that simple. If I can have the next slide, because some drugs come out of your body much more quickly, and the green line shows an example of that. So it goes up just as quickly as the blue line, but then your liver and your kidneys can get rid of this drug much faster. And so you can see it falls down very quickly. And on the next slide, we can see after about 3 hours that this patient's going to be in pain because they won't have enough in their blood. So what can we do about this? Well, on the next slide, you can see the obvious thing is we can give another dose. And this is what happens when you give another dose. It goes up and then it comes down again. And now this is looking better because, as you can see, for most of that 24-hour period, this patient's has got the amount of drug in their blood is in the purple box. So they've got enough, but not too much for most of the time. So that's my second example of how pharmacists can use science. If we understand how much drug we need in our blood and how quickly we get rid of it, we can work out how much to give someone and how often to give it to make sure that they're being treated effectively. But I'm sure you're looking at this graph and seeing that there are some problems here. And one of those problems is that just before each dose, the patient doesn't have enough in their blood, and so they might have some pain. And then on the next slide, we can see just after each dose, they have too much in their blood. And so now they might be having some side effects. And then finally, on the next slide, we can see as well that this poor patient is now having 6 injections a day, and really nobody wants that, do they? So we're getting, it's getting better, but it's still not perfect. What can we do about this situation? Well, next slide, please. One option is to use a machine like this. This is called a syringe pump. And you can see it's got a syringe attached to it, and it very slowly pushes in the plunger on that syringe to inject the injection into the patient over a 24-hour period. And you can see it goes in through that the yellow needle there with the red circle around it. That's a very tiny needle that sits just under the skin that you wouldn't really notice. On the next slide, we can see if you work out how quickly to give this, after an hour or two for everything to kind of get into this patient's system, they have a very steady and consistent amount of drug in their blood over a whole 24-hour period. And you could carry this on for a long time. You just change the syringe driver every 24 hours, and they always have just the right amount of drug in their blood. And so this is a really nice way of delivering medicines to these patients that gives good control of symptoms without having side effects. On the next slide, we still have a problem now, because I said earlier that these people have lots of symptoms and might need lots of medicines. And on the next slide, we have a decision to make. We can put several drugs into one syringe driver, like it shows here, or next slide, we can have one syringe driver for each medicine. Now, we'd rather have all the drugs mixed together in one syringe because no one wants to have 3 of those machines and 3 needles stuck into them. But if we're mixing these drugs together and they're going to be sitting there in this syringe for 24 hours, we want to make sure that they're going to be stable. They're not going to chemically react with each other in that time and end up producing something else that we don't want to give to the patient. And that's another way that we need to use our science. So on the next page, one of the things we need to think about is pH, because some drugs, next slide, like this one, like to dissolve in an acidic injection. So this drug is dissolved in an acidic injection of about pH 4. other drugs, like the next slide, like to dissolve in an alkaline injection. So this one's dissolved at about pH 8 or 9. What's going to happen if we mix these two injections together in a syringe driver? Next slide, please. Well, what's probably going to happen is that the pH is going to meet somewhere in the middle, maybe about 6 or 7. But what's going to happen to those two drugs? Because one likes to dissolve in an acidic injection, one likes to dissolve in an alkaline injection, and we've mixed them and we've now got more of a neutral pH. What's going to happen? And as pharmacists, we need to use our understanding of science to help with that. And so what I'm going to do now is demonstrate what happens to explain this a little bit more to you. So Rosie, if you could stop sharing the slides, because in a moment I'm going to turn on a visualizer so you can see what I'm doing. So what I've got here in the office with me is some syringes I filled up earlier with a drug called dexamethasone. This is the drug that likes to dissolve in an alkaline environment that I showed to you on the last slide. And you might have heard of dexamethasone. It was the drug that was discovered last year as one of the first drugs that is actually effective in treating people with COVID. And so we've been using loads of it in the last year, but it's actually a really old drug. It's probably 50 or 60 years old. We use it for loads of different things. And in this situation, we use it to control people's feelings of sickness. So I'm going to show you what happens when we mix dexamethasone with some other medicines. So I'm just going to turn on my visualizer. So just give me a moment to get this in focus. So the first thing I'm going to show you then, here we have a syringe containing dexamethasone. And let's check what its pH is first of all. So I have some pH paper here. Let's just see if I'm right in saying this is an alkaline injection. I'll just put a little drop on there. There we go. So you can see the color there. I think if I put that pH wheel next to it, that's about pH 8 or 9. So we have here an alkaline injection. Now let's say we want to mix that with an acidic injection. I'm going to mix it with something called cyclizine. So here is a vial of cyclizine. I'll try and get that in focus for you. It's just a little glass ampule, which I'm just going to have to snap the top off, being very careful not to cut myself. There is a technique to this. And then I'm going to attach a needle to my syringe and I'm going to pull some of the cyclizine into the dexamethasone. So before I do that, I want you to have a good look at this syringe as I get it in focus. Notice how it looks just like water in there. If I put my finger underneath, you can see my finger. You can probably just about see that blue stain through it. So you can see through this. This is a clear, colorless solution. And this is what we want injections to be like. Injections should just be liquids. We don't want anything solid in there. So here is my cyclizine. And I'll just wait for the visualizer to get in focus. And I'll draw this up and watch very carefully what happens in the syringe as I put a little bit in. Just a bubble of air coming in. There we go. Can you see it's starting to go cloudy? And you can't quite see through it so well. I'll just put a bit more in. Going cloudy again. It looks like milk now, doesn't it? And if I put my finger underneath, you can't see my finger through there. It's gone all cloudy and milky. And that's because as we mix this alkaline injection with the acidic cyclizine injection, the pH is becoming neutral. And now either the dexamethasone or the cyclizine or both of them is not soluble at that new pH. And so you get lots of tiny solid little particles in there. Let's just check that what I'm telling you has been correct. Here's my pH paper again. I'm going to pour some cyclizine onto it. There we go. We can see it's certainly a different color to what we were getting with the dexamethasone. And if I put my wheel next to it, that's maybe about pH 4. So we've mixed a pH 4 injection with a pH 8 injection. And let's move that out of the way, get a fresh bit of paper. Let's see what the pH of the mixture is. Put it there. It's about pH 6. So we've mixed pH 4 with pH 8. We've got pH 6. And as you can see, here's my mixture again, and you still can't see through it. It still looks like milk. And this is a real problem, because if we were giving this to a patient, those little particles in there could block the needle. They could irritate the patient's skin. And because drug needs to be dissolved to work in your blood, it might actually stop it working if they just sit in the patient's skin, and they'll certainly slow it down. So we can't mix these together. That's a problem. What can we do about that? Well, one thing we know from our chemistry knowledge is that reactions happen faster when things are more concentrated, and also they happen more slowly in more dilute solutions. So what I have here is a bigger syringe. This has got 8 mils of water in it and 1 mil of dexamethasone injection. So it's diluted. And I'm going to add the cyclazine into this, and we'll see what happens. So I'll just open another ampule of cyclazine.
Great. And so if you guys are streaming right now from a chemistry class, or maybe you're a chemistry student, you just heard it. That directly relates to a career in pharmacy. So getting a great head start there on your studies.
Thanks, Rosie. So here is my dexamethasone in the syringe. You can see, once again, you can see through that syringe. There's my finger under it. Here's a new ampule of cyclazine. I'm going to draw that up. And last time when I did this, we saw that cloudy milk-like mixture occurring. And when I do that now, I've now emptied that vial of cyclazine. And if I hold that there and let it get in focus for you, you can still see my finger through it. So by diluting this cyclazine, or by diluting the dexamethasone with some water, we've prevented this from happening, because essentially the molecules are all further apart from each other. So that's a way we can use our science to solve problems. And to finish off then, I'll demonstrate that it's not just a problem with cyclazine. So I have now a new syringe here. This has got dexamethasone in it. I have another drug now, this one here. This is called promethazine. And promethazine is an antihistamine. So it's the sort of thing you might take if you've got hay fever, although you wouldn't take this one. It would make you incredibly drowsy. But we can also use it to treat people who are feeling sick. And that's what we use it for in this situation. This is another acidic drug, or dissolved in an acidic injection at least. Watch what happens here when I mix them together. Instantaneously, you get that milky effect. It's actually more impressive with the promethazine than with the cyclazine. So once again, we can't mix these together. If I put my finger there, you can't see my finger through. But if I take my diluted, this is a new syringe of diluted dexamethasone. I'm going to put some promethazine in here and see what happens. So that get in focus. There we go. So this is diluted. I'm sucking in lots of air. And can you see that cloudy effect? You can't see my finger through this one. So with promethazine, even if we dilute it, we still have a problem. And so as pharmacists, we need to be aware of these issues, so we can solve those problems when it's possible, and obviously avoid the situation and do something different when solving that problem is not possible. So that's really the end of what I have to say. Pharmacists use all sorts of science to help their patients, particularly chemistry and biology, but we use psychology, bits of mathematics and statistics, physics. Yeah, next slide, Rosie, thank you. So if you're interested in studying lots of different types of science and seeing how they relate to each other, or in using science to actually help people and to improve their health, then then do explore pharmacy in more detail. So that's everything from me. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much, Matthew. And you guys, if you have any questions for Matthew, go ahead and put them in the Q&A now, and we'll get to them at the end. So now, really excited to introduce Amy, who is a current pharmacy student studying at Bath University. And she's going to tell you a little bit about herself.
Thanks, Rosie. So, hi, I'm Amy. I'm a fourth year pharmacy student, so that's the final year of the MPharm degree. I'm originally from North Yorkshire. I did chemistry, biology and maths at A-level, and I always knew I wanted to go to university, and I knew I wanted to do something sciencey, but I wasn't quite sure for a while what I wanted to do. I thought about doing chemistry or biochem or something like that, but then I just knew I didn't really want to have a career in a lab or anything like that. And I found out about pharmacy actually on like a careers test at school, and then the more I looked into it, the more it looked like a good fit. It combined the science stuff and the chemistry with the working with people, which is something I'd always wanted to do as well. And I decided that there was so much more I could do with a pharmacy degree than a chemistry degree. Nothing I might have wanted to do with a chemistry degree, I wouldn't have been able to do with a pharmacy degree. And there's so many more options. And then in the end, I do want to be a pharmacist. I've done most of the degree. I love it. As Matthew said, like, one of the things that I really like about it is the variety. You do learn so many different types of things, and it keeps it really interesting. And there's all the science stuff and then the clinical stuff as well, where we go into hospitals and into the community and do you get to apply your knowledge as you're learning it, which keeps, helps you to see why you're learning things. So a bit more about applying for. So why did I choose this route? So I'll cover that. So I did my A-levels, and then while I was doing my A-levels, I had to apply for university, and for pharmacy, you do a interview as well. So you put your UCAS form in, and then you get interviews, and then you go to the university for the interview. They were not too stressful. It's not something really to be worried about. And it was a great way to see the university again, and to get to know the staff and the department a bit more, to see more what it might be like when you're actually there. And then, so for me, as I said, I want to be a hospital pharmacist. So I'm applying to do my training year in a hospital, and then at the end of that year, I'll do an exam, hopefully pass it, and then look into getting a job in hospital pharmacy. And then eventually I'd like to become a prescriber and specialise in something. Haven't decided what yet. I think that's
great. Well, thank you so much, Amy. And you guys, if you have any questions for Amy, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. I see we've had a couple. So it's time to move on to the Q&A section now. So I'm actually going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that you can see all of your panelists here answering your questions. So first question we have here, and I believe this would be best for Nick probably. It's, can I go to the pharmacy route with level 3 applied science?
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. It's a really good question. In order, the normal kind of the standard requirements to get into a pharmacy degree is A-levels, but several universities in England do accept a BTEC, an extended diploma, BTEC extended diploma in applied science. Some of those universities will require A-level chemistry as well, but some won't, but they might specify specific units be completed as part of that extended part of the extended diploma. So hopefully that answers your question. Not all of the universities will give that information really clearly. So sometimes you've got to ring up the admissions tutor and have a chat with them. It does vary. Some universities say no, just A-levels, but some say yes, BTEC in applied science, an extended diploma, and others will say yes if you've got A-level chemistry as well.
Great, thanks so much. And I think this one would be best for you too. And actually, if you could just generally speak as well on, someone asked, do you have to do maths? Someone said, can you do pharmacy without biology? What do you recommend studying now to go into pharmacy?
Um, you need essentially the right number of UCAS points, which is typically 3 A levels, looking at the sciences and maths. You need chemistry. Most pharmacy degrees will say you have to have chemistry as one of your A levels. You don't necessarily have to have biology. You don't necessarily have to have maths. I think the perfect combination would probably be chemistry, biology, and maths. When I went to university, I didn't do maths, so I started with chemistry, biology, and physics as my A levels going into a pharmacy degree. And I kind of the degree that I did offered some specific kind of upskilling catch-up bits on maths, which, to be honest, probably didn't really need in terms of actually kind of progressing within the degree. So chemistry is a must. Biology and maths are really useful, but 3 A levels. But if you don't have exactly biology, chemistry, maths, as long as you've got chemistry, you can probably do without one of the others.
Great, thanks. And kind of on the flip side of that, can you do pharmacy with a chemistry degree?
I think that would be a question for an admissions tutor. It would depend, I suppose, looking back at what qualifications you got prior to your chemistry degree. I would have thought that you would be able to go in with that qualification under your belt. If that's the question, do you have a chemistry degree already? I think that's your answer. That's your question. The answer would be probably yes, but you'd need to be having a chat with the admissions tutor at that point.
Great, thanks so much. Oh, sorry.
Matthew, do you want to add into that? Because you
Well,
a bit close to
I
the game.
was just going to say, for absolute clarity, Nick, that you can't go and be a pharmacist with a chemistry degree. You have to have a pharmacy degree to be a pharmacist.
Yeah. So that's yeah. So if that's, I guess, I interpreted that question as being, can you get onto a pharmacy degree with a chemistry degree? But actually, if the question is, can you become a pharmacist with a chemistry degree? No, the only way to become a pharmacist is to do an MPharm degree. That's a Master of Pharmacy degree, because that degree is accredited by the General Pharmaceutical Council, and that's a requirement for entering the profession. Thanks, Matthew. That's a really good, good point.
Great. So we have another question here for Amy. Amy, what are some of the modules you study in your pharmacy degree?
So most of our modules are arranged around a system or a clinical area. So in the second and third years, our modules were things like gastrointestinal and liver disease, respiratory disease, dermatology. Last year we did some on neurology and mental health, oncology, so cancer and palliative care, a special patient group, so about specific people who have specific needs like pregnancy, renal impairment, children. And then in the first year at Bath anyway, it tends to be more of it's a bit more of a foundation year. So you have modules that we had 2 types of modules really. Oh no, there's 3 types, because you have a sort of professionalism module each year as well. So that gives you professional skills. It's where you learn skills that you need in your career, like dispensing, counselling skills, things like that. But in first year you have sort of more chemistry modules and more biology-based modules, and this helps get you the sort of baseline of knowledge that you need to then apply that knowledge to different clinical areas. And then in the final year, you have to do a research project because it's a master's degree. So I'm just about to start that. And then in the second term, you move on to more like complex patients and applying all the knowledge you've learned over the first 3 years to really complex patients, the sort of patients you will see in real life.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. So you guys, lots of different things go into this degree. So a question here, and Matthew or Nick, this would probably be best for you. But what are kind of the differences between a medical chemistry degree and a pharmaceutical degree?
Shall I do that, Nick?
Yes, please.
So medicinal chemistry is all about the chemistry of how drugs are made and how they work. And my colleague Lorenzo is a medicinal chemist. That's your background, isn't it, Lorenzo? If you study a Master of Pharmacy degree, you will learn some medicinal chemistry. if you do a medicinal chemistry degree, you'll study a lot more medicinal chemistry. And so you'll learn about that in more detail, but you can't go on from that and study and be a pharmacist. So with that sort of degree, you would probably go into research or work as a chemist in a company somewhere, that sort of thing. So in a pharmacy degree, you do some medicinal chemistry, but then you study lots of other related science as well, and how to practice as a pharmacist and put all of that together to work as a pharmacist.
Great, thanks, Matthew. And kind of on this, and I don't know if this is really your area of expertise or anyone on here, but how does a chemical engineering degree link with pharmacy? Or does it at all?
There are links. So when drugs are manufactured at really large scale to sell around the world, you need chemical engineers to help you do that, to help you develop the factories and all the machines that do that. So there are definite links. In a pharmacy degree, you don't really study any chemical engineering. It's a very different discipline. In the pharmaceutical industry, then medicinal chemists and pharmacists and chemical engineers and other people will all be working together on these projects. But at university level, chemical engineering and pharmacy are quite different degrees.
Thanks so much. And then we have another question here, probably best for Nick or Matthew as well. But to become a pharmaceutical scientist, would you advise to take pharmacy as a degree course?
I think that's a good question, isn't it? I think there are careers for pharmacists within the pharmaceutical industry. So if you were to do an MPharm degree, most people go to become a pharmacist in clinical practice, whether it's community pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, general practice. A very small number of people go on to work within the pharmaceutical industry. Whether or not they are at the cutting edge of the science and chemistry side of things, you might argue actually they're probably more in a regulatory, advisory, clinical role, but you can go into the pharmaceutical industry with a pharmacy degree. But actually, if you want to be a research scientist, then it would probably be a better route to look at a pharmacology degree or a medicinal chemistry degree or something like that, which would take you down the research scientist route and could prepare you for those roles within the pharmaceutical industry as a pharmaceutical scientist. I think that would be my take on it. Matthew, I don't know if you want to agree, disagree, or add to that.
That seems fair to me. The other thing to add is quite often to go into those research roles, particularly at a more senior level, you'll need a PhD as well, which is another degree you do after your first degree, you can believe it. And so if you say, like, actually, I've done one of those. I did a pharmacy degree, then I did a PhD. So I didn't go and work for the pharmaceutical industry, but with that specialist knowledge from my PhD in laboratory science, I could have done. So you're not necessarily cutting off the option of an industrial career with a pharmacy degree, but you might have a slightly better chance if you did a medicinal chemistry or a pharmacology degree.
Great, thanks. So I just want to be conscious of time as people, it is during term time. And I want to make sure that before people kind of sign off here, that you see this more things to explore slide. So just give me 1 second here to pull it up. Great, here we go. So Nick, do you kind of want to talk through this quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole kind of group of different things that you can, different resources that are now available to look at in terms of pharmacy careers. These links give you some of the main resources that you might find useful. So the top link there is the Health Careers website, which is an NHS website. In it is that careers map that we showed you earlier on the slide, which is the second link. There is also embedded within that top link, the next one, which is an interactive resource. It's an interactive PDF that takes you through the different careers and different examples of where you might end up working. And then below that, there's a number of other things which are, if you haven't got enough information from those top three links, you then might want to have a look at those as well. There's something from the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, which is the professional body for pharmacists. There's something from the GPHC, which is the regulator for pharmacy, talking about the degrees that it accredits. And then under that, there's 2 links to the pharmacist and the pharmacy technician role on the National Careers Service website, which is that government hosted website. So it's the gov.uk address there. So if you're going to have a look at one of those, have a look at the top link. The top 3, I think, will give you 99% of what you need if you're interested in learning about pharmacy careers.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Nick. And thanks so much to all of our panelists for being on today. Such great information. And you guys, while you're still on, if you want to go ahead and take a photo of this, you can do so that you have the links handy. I'm also going to pop 2 links here in the chat box. The first one is our next event with NHS Pharmacy. So that will be on the 3rd of November. It's an evening event, so it will be at 6 o'clock. So if you're really interested today, go ahead and sign up for this event. And I'm also putting in a link to a survey. If you could all please go ahead and fill out this survey, it'll just help us cater our events more toward exactly what you're looking for. So once again, thank you so much, Matthew, Nick, and Amy, for being here. Such great information today. And we will see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rosie. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Nice to talk to you.